Okay, well, good morning all. It's 10:30, so we'll get underway with this morning's webinar. So firstly, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Lee Benhennett, and I'll be joined by several other presenters this morning, and I'll introduce them shortly. Incitec Pivot and Heritage Seeds have collaborated on today's topic, and it's filling the autumn and winter feed gap, and we aim to focus on key areas that'll influence feed on offer in the short to medium term, and also look at the longevity of perennial pastures in our pasture systems. I suppose there are variations in the seasons across all districts and states, and but I guess in general there is a consistency of most farmers having a poor spring last year. We've had a hot, dry summer, which has led to bare paddocks, and I suppose we've got a reliance on expensive brought-in feed. So getting animals onto homegrown feed will be a priority. So the aim of today is to really provide information and tips to assess, plan, and then action some strategies for pasture transition into the autumn and winter. So we'll go through the presentation, and then at the end, Tim Pepper from Heritage Seeds will chair a question session. So if you've got any queries, just hold the questions to that point in time. Hopefully that'll scroll down. Click. Why won't that scroll? Here we go. All good. Okay, so the other presenters that will be joining me this morning will be Jim Laycock, who's a technical agronomist with Incitec Pivot Fertilisers. We've got Rob Winter, who's a territory manager, and also Tom Dixon, who's a research manager up at the Heritage Seeds How Long research site. So just to kick off this morning, it's very slow. So just to kick off this morning, I just want to set the scene, I suppose, on what we really want to be talking about. And it's really, like I said earlier, about the pasture maintenance and options for the short and medium term feed supply. So we're coming out of, as I said, a hot, dry summer. We potentially have perennial pasture systems that are run down. We've got annual pastures in the system that may need to be established, and then obviously we've got these opportunities for some fodder crops that to be introduced into the system for the really short-term feed deficit that we'll see coming out of the dry autumn and into the winter. So the key is, I suppose, looking at the short term. How can we fill those feed gaps? What are the strategies around fertiliser and also with pastures with maintaining and also regenerating some feed in front of the livestock. Can't seem to get that to click down. So I'll just be focusing on soil testing, phosphorus, and also nitrogen from a fertiliser perspective. We won't be going into all the major nutrients and all the trace elements and all the things around nutrition. It will be a bit more of a targeted program just around what we're doing with around soil testing, and also with the phosphorus side, which is a key driver in any legume-based system. And then towards the end, nitrogen is going to be really key to growing additional dry matter coming into that autumn and winter. So the next slide is really just a setup, I guess, around when we look at responses to nutrients. It's all about response curves. So response curves have been derived from Department of Ag CSIRO work and independent bodies like Incitec Pivot Fertilisers on understanding how much of a response you get to an applied nutrient and where those nutrients need to be to maximise dry matter production. So on the left-hand side of this axis is potential yield, and on the bottom on the x-axis is whether you're in a deficient situation or a marginal situation with respect to nutrition, or you're satisfactory. So where you sit on that response curve, you can only really determine by having a soil test and understanding for each nutrient, whether it's phosphorus, potassium or sulphur, where you actually sit and what likely a response you're going to get. So if you're in a deficient situation and you apply a particular nutrient, you're going to get a large response to that applied nutrient. Whereas if you're in the satisfactory range with respect to your critical value, then you apply the nutrient, you're unlikely to get a huge response. All you're really doing is just maintaining that fertility to keep your maximum or your production close to the maximum of what that particular paddock can give. So there's a couple of strategies, I suppose, around that. So the first one is if you are in the satisfactory zone, so click on that, Will, just clicking through. So if you're in the satisfactory zone for soil fertility, then your strategy is just going to be maintained. So what is actually being taken off by the animals and a little bit of soil fixation or loss, it's just going to be about maintenance. So understanding what those maintenance numbers are. If you're deficient, then your strategy would be to not only apply maintenance, so what the animals are taking off, but it's also a capital application to actually move further up that response curve. So that you're actually maximising your pasture production. However, if you're above the satisfactory range, then you're not going to be growing any more pasture for that excessing nutrient that you've got in your soils, and it's actually quite inefficient. So you can actually mine some of those nutrients out potentially and reduce those levels back so that you're in the satisfactory zone. So if we go to the next slide, the next couple of slides are really about some work that was done by Cameron Goulet and his team on the better fertilisers decisions for pastures. And I guess these are reference tools that you can use and have a look at your own leisure. But it basically, there's two categories. This first slide is for a beef sheep system, and the second slide is for a dairy type system. And the difference between the two is that with a dairy system, you're actually sitting higher up that response curve, so therefore your critical values or your critical ranges are a little bit higher. But it runs through Olsen P, so we've just got a single number for all soil types or a single range for all soil types when we talk about Olsen P. And in a beef sheep system, if we've got an Olsen P of 12 to 15, we're going to be sitting somewhere up around 90 to 95% of our maximum yield. If we're looking at coal wool P tests, which some of the New South Wales guys will be using in particular, more so than Victoria, then we use a coal wool P, but we've also got to use the PBI test from the soil analysis as well to come up with a critical value. So the heavier the soil type, the higher the PBI, the higher the critical coal wool P will be. When we look at coal wool K values, we've got to take into account the soil texture, and those soil textures will come off your soil test as well. So again, the critical values are higher on the heavier soil types. And then sulphur, we've just got one set of ranges for all soils for when we look at sulphur with the KCL 40 measurements. So we just keep that number there in mind, because we'll flick to a graph in a second and have a look at where that critical value is. So we're looking at a PBI of 140 to 280 on a clay loam to get 90 to 95% of maximum yield. So the next slide is pretty much just looking at the dairy system. So it's the same sort of thing as the previous slide, except it's just higher values based on the fact that we're sitting higher on the response curve, so therefore the critical values are higher. The next slide's all about soil testing and the importance of it, and whether the farmer takes an individual sample or the agronomist takes a sample, getting a representative sample is really important, and we need at least 25 individual cores to make up a sample. And there's a couple of ways that we can go about soil testing. One is we can go and sample every 5 to 7 years and get a really comprehensive analysis done, and that might cost $150 for that comprehensive soil test. But things like phosphorus buffering index and pH, they don't change very quickly. So if you get one less frequently with a comprehensive list of analytes being tested, then it gives you a base to refer back to over time. But more importantly, we need to be assessing phosphorus, potassium if our potassium levels are low, and also sulphur on an annual basis. And Richard Simpson from the CSIRO advocates soils testing every paddock every year. Now, if you just go to these basic analytes of P, K and S, then the cost of that soil test can come down significantly, but you can keep a really good handle on where those levels are. So then that basically is represented in this trial that was done up at CSIRO, with the CSIRO at Canberra. And there's a couple of things about it. One, it's a long-term trial. It was run from 1994 to 2006, I think. And in the blue dotted line in the background there, that's the response curve, the pasture response curve for phosphorus. And as I said before, if we remember back to that PBI of 140 to 280, and we had the critical value, I think, of 38 to 42. So we wanted to be somewhere around, to get 90 to 95% of maximum yield, somewhere around 40 coal wool P. So that's our target. And so there's a couple of phases here that we're looking with respect to phosphorus fertility. The first one is a soil build-up. So we're deficient. We're below 10 in the coal wool P, so we want to lift that value up over time. So we're actually applying above what the maintenance rates would be in that particular situation to actually move that fertility up. And then once we've got to that level of where we want to be, that critical value, we want to hold that level. So we drop our fertiliser rates back. We fertilise potentially less frequently, but we just want to maintain it around the 40 number. And you can see in the red line what actually happens if you withhold fertiliser from that, and you can see what happens as far as the drawdown of P over time and the reduction in base fertility. So one of the key points around this, I guess, is you can just see the movement of each of those points, and each of those points represents a sample. So you can see that an absolute number is probably not the best way to go. We're more looking at trends over time. And so standalone figures can often lead to sort of a misinterpretation. So if you can sample every paddock every year, you can understand the trends, not the absolute number. And I think it's a better way to go, because we will get that seasonal and temporal variation just through conditions of sampling. There'll be spatial variation, and you can even get slight variation through the labs and through individual labs as well. So just to take out that variation, we look at trends, and if you can sample more frequently, then in a targeted approach, then it's a better way to go. So just some other key things around that. Representative samples, so make sure you don't mix soil types or different areas that have had different management history. Always make sure we're sampling 0 to 10 centimetres, no deeper, no shallower. And, if we're talking about establishing long-term perennial pastures, a Lucerne or a Phalaris, it's also advised to take a deeper sample and segment them down. So you might go a 10 to 30, a 30 to 50, and a 50 to 70 centimetres, and assess things like pH and aluminium, boron, acidicity, all those sort of things that may limit that root development moving down the profile, and then limiting the potential of that pasture species. So yeah, I might hand over to Jim Laycock just to talk about a couple of slides. So I'll pass over to you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Just in terms of once you've got your soil test back, obviously it's important to understand nutrient behaviour in soils as well. So just a couple of little slides here just to talk about the application of nutrients. Once you've got your soil test back and you've decided on your rate of application. So when we're thinking about nitrogen in the system, we need to understand that when we're putting nitrogen out, it's basically not in plant available form at top dress, unless you're using EZN as an example, where it's got the plant available nitrate in it. So when we put urea out on the soil surface, it actually converts to plant available nitrate over a period of time. Once it's nitrate, then it's quite mobile in soil. So broadcasting nitrogen over a grass-based pasture or over a forage crop is a really efficient way of getting N into the system, or nitrate in particular, because it actually moves quite freely in soil. So surface broadcast, a shower of rain, and that nitrate then moves down into the root zone available for plant uptake. So it's critical to get that nitrate into the root zone as quickly as you can, because once it's in the root zone, the plants, particularly the grasses, obviously the perennials or the annual cereals, can take it up quite quickly and turn it into biomass and feed. So when we look at phosphorus, it's an entirely different story. Phosphorus is a very immobile nutrient in soil. So if you look at that phosphorus diagram there, and it's American data, you've got that 1 inch square type scenario, you can see the point of placement of phosphorus is very, very limited. It doesn't move in soils. So it's critical to put phosphorus where you need it in the system. So if you're sowing a forage crop or sowing pasture, you need to put phosphorus down the tube with the seed, so those seeds and their developing roots can access that banded P. When you're sowing a forage crop, particularly cereals, that banded P, the roots actually proliferate around that banded phosphorus in that system, increase their root area, increase their root mass, and they're actually able to access more soil nutrients and more soil moisture. So banding P in cereal and pasture establishment systems is the key. When you're top dressing phosphorus in a perennial grass-based system, obviously you can see the points of contact are critical in terms of the amount of P that's going to be available to that subclover or white clover that's got surface feeder roots. So the higher the points of contact, as in spreading a low analysis fertiliser that gives you more points of contact on the surface soil, give you more root uptake from those surface feeders as well. So broadcasting P into the system, perennial grass with a legume base, very efficient. Potassium is mostly mobile in most soils, the granites in particular. Some soils it's partly mobile, but it is much more mobile than phosphorus. So once again, broadcasting potash, muriate of potash on the soil surface is a very efficient way of surface feeding legumes. You can broadcast potash basically at any time. It's not limited by environmental conditions, so it's actually quite stable on the soil surface, and rain will move it down through that soil profile. Obviously, when you're thinking about top dressing pastures, it's critical to understand the amount of ground cover you have and the amount of slope you have as well, with the potential for maybe some of that nutrient applied to move down the slope or move away from your target. So just a couple of photos here that Lee took, and I bet he didn't leave that dollar coin behind. I bet he picked that up after he took these photos. Lucerne and phalaris pastures with good ground cover. So it's interesting when you actually look at these sorts of photos and reference other photos of ground cover. 70% ground cover is it's not a lot of ground cover, but it's adequate to capture that top dressed fertiliser that you put on. The phosphorus that's in that fertiliser granule is actually in that soil within 48 hours without having to rely on follow-up rain. So it's a capillary action where you've got any little bit of moisture in the soil will actually absorb or pull phosphorus out of that fertiliser granule, so it's in the soil and safe. So you think about the slope, you think about the ground cover, and then you start to think about when I can actually top dress my perennial pastures, or whether I can actually put nitrogen onto those perennial pastures as well. So remember, nitrogen, or that nitrate form, is more mobile than phosphorus, so you need to be a little bit careful about how much ground cover you've got there. And obviously, if you're thinking about putting nitrogen out, you put it out when something's growing. It won't help stuff to grow. It's got to be growing. So if you've got low ground cover and you're concerned about any runoff, potentially you may need to wait and actually get a little bit of a germination and increase your ground cover that way. Slope, if you're looking at ground cover on slope country, if you've got less than 50% slope and you've got reasonable ground cover, go ahead and top dress. If you've got sloping country and less than 70% ground cover, wait for a germination and then you can top dress to make sure that that fertiliser doesn't end up down in the gully or the creek. Thanks, Lee.
Don't have modifications as you pull in. Pretty good, yourself?
All right, so I'll hand over to Rob Winter here from Heritage Seeds.
Okay. Normally what happens with that type of thing,
it's Tom Dixon here. It sounds like Rob Winter must have dropped out or something like that. So I can carry on for Rob, but I might need you to change the slides for me, Will.
Yeah, not a problem, Tom.
Yeah. So I'm touching on, I guess, the challenges from a varietal selection and making decisions based on pasture composition. And some of the things we need to consider, we'll touch on in this presentation, is the autumn management of perennial pastures coming out of the dry, and that's really around the perennial pastures. Pasture renovation program, so that's categorising the different pastures into, I guess, ground cover, and then start to develop a renovation program that can be implemented to get the pastures back into production, different oversowing options, and then the fast feed options, so the benefits of the different species and what they can provide, and then some options, tips and management for the pastures. Move to the next slide. So when we talk about autumn feed, and we're largely talking about established perennial pastures. So the most typical perennial pastures that will provide feed in autumn are the Phalaris and coxfoot established pastures, perennial ryegrass, and Lucerne. And that's not, they're obviously pastures that have been established the year prior, and then it's sitting there ready to go as soon as the rain, you get rain in autumn, obviously you can kick away and provide feed, but they need to be managed correctly. And you also might find, particularly with the hot, dry summer we've had this year with perennial ryegrass, that the composition and the stand density of, say, perennial ryegrass will be severely reduced, and they may be required to go in and either oversow the pasture to top it back up, or in another situation, might be that it just needs a rest period, allowed to get enough autumn feed on offer, and then start grazing. Let's move to the next slide. So probably encourage you guys and anyone that's involved in looking at pastures to walk over your pastures and I guess categorise the pastures into different groups. So we've got there on the right hand side, 70 to 80% is basically a relatively good pasture still. Might just require a little bit of management with fertiliser, grazing manipulation, and should be right to continue the way it is. Pasture species where they say 40% of okay species would probably require some level of oversowing, and anything below 30% really requires a renovation program or a short-term oversowing option. Next slide. So just here are some examples of various stages of decline. So on the left-hand side there, we've got a pasture that's got really good cover, 85% desirable species. Through grazing and fertiliser management, that pasture is going to be an excellent pasture going forward. So it's all about management in that situation. Whereas on the right-hand side there, there's just some different pastures there with different covers. So approximately 40%. So there's some desirable species there. That's what it'll look like. So you've got a few plants that are looking pretty good. However, it's going to probably require a top up to really maximise its production. And then down on the bottom right-hand side there, you've got reduced covers, so that really requires a full renovation, and that can be done with a short-term species, so usually a fodder crop and one of those autumn feed options. Let's move to the next one. So our better pastures, and this is a critical stage on most farms to get right, is that the species that are in good shape and have that high composition of desirable species, is that we don't go in and graze the paddocks too early. So we really want to allow the plants, once they're coming out of that summer period and they've gone through a stressful period, want them to be able to shoot out their new leaves when the rain arrives. But that what happens when they first shoot in autumn is that the plant draws down on its energy reserves, and it's not until it can grow a reasonable amount of leaf area, and say for ryegrass that's the kind of 2.5 to 3 leaf stage, or say for a coxfoot Phalaris pasture it's around that 4 leaf stage, that the plant has had a chance to replenish its reserves, and then it's made it a lot more robust going into winter. So if we're going in and we're grazing those pastures, as soon as we've got one leaf up and the plant's had a chance to recover, but hasn't replenished its reserves in the roots, what we're going to find is that we're going to severely impact the flow on or grazing potential of that variety for the rest of the year. So I do encourage you on your perennial pastures that you remove stock until you can get some leaf area, a reasonable amount of cover, and try and graze at the correct leaf stage. And what you'll do is you'll set your pastures up for going through winter into early spring. Generally, if you draw down on those reserves coming out of winter, the pastures will be a lot slower, and you just won't maximise your production over your farm. So we really want to implement a rotational grazing or grazing method on those pastures to allow adequate rest periods. And this is an example here of perennial ryegrass grazed at a set stocking stage. So the double S there on the right hand side is where the ryegrass was grazed continuously. 2 weeks moving along, and then 4-week stage, and then at the correct 3-leaf stage. And you can see the impact that grazing has on leaf production or forage production, but also on the roots below the ground. And you know, a plant that's been set stocked and had continuous grazing is going to have a far reduced root system, reduced energy reserves in the plant, and therefore it just won't be able to survive and kick away and produce as it should. The next one. Also want to, in that early autumn period, is to consider addressing any pest issues. So you really want to monitor your pest issues leading into establishing the pasture, but also once the pasture's up and going and in that critical seedling stage. So things like cockchafers, white fringed weevil, red-legged earth mites are obviously a really big one the last few years, and they can severely impact the plants in the establishment stage. And some of the things you can do to overcome this is apply an insecticide in your knockdown herbicide when establishing the pasture. It might mean using a systemic insecticide treated seed, which will help control, cotyledons in subclover against red-legged earth mite, but also might mean that post-emergence that we have to come through and apply an insecticide to control a number of those insect pests. Now, some of the cockchafer insects or grubs actually can't be controlled with an insecticide, so understanding, I guess, what's there, and sometimes cultivation can assist in reducing their numbers and reducing their impact moving forward. Go next one, Will. Another critical thing with Lucerne is, and some work done by Derek Moody out of Lincoln University, New Zealand, is that the rest period for Lucerne is really critical in that autumn recovery period. Generally, the root reserves of the plant is not influenced by grazing recovery through spring and early summer. However, coming back into autumn, a rest period over around a 4-week is critical for increasing the root mass of Lucerne. So, at the moment, we're coming out of a dry year. You've probably got Lucerne that's just starting to recover. I'd be really encouraging everyone that does have Lucerne stands, and I know everyone will be short on feed, but to give it a rest period for 4 weeks in autumn to help replenish those root reserves and increase the strength of the plant, which will rebound a lot better coming into spring. And obviously, if you're grazing pretty heavily through this autumn period, you can actually impact plant numbers and you'll impact your total production. So rest periods in autumn for Lucerne is a critical thing. And obviously, to maximise production, if you think of pastures as having a responsive plant species, as we mentioned earlier, making sure we've got responsive plant species that will maximise our production and high plant densities. And then correct grazing management, as we've touched on already, and particularly for pastures coming out of summer. But the third one is obviously, as Jim and Lee have touched on, is obviously fertilising and making sure that we're applying fertiliser to our pastures to maximise production. It's when sowing, you've got fertiliser applied in the furrow, and then post emergence that things like nitrogen and your maintenance or capital applications of fertiliser are applied to maximise production. And I guess what prep is good enough, and do I go ahead through the annual phase? So just in this situation here, what method are we going to use to establish it? If we've got high levels of trash cover on the ground, sometimes trying to remove a bit of trash will aid in establishment. Cultivated seed bed will obviously get really good establishment, but can in some situations stir up a number of weeds, and that can be a critical one when establishing a phalaris pasture. That if you do have background annual grass weeds there, cultivation can actually stir up a lot of weeds and impact the establishment of the pasture. So cultivation is best establishment, but if you do have weed issues, sometimes direct drilling can be an effective method. Going through. And then there's oversowing to existing pasture, and depending on what implement you got, but tine implements and disc implements can cut through particularly if you've got coolers on front of your tines, will cut through trash and allow you to oversow into pastures. And this can be an effective method, as touched on earlier, to bulk up our perennial pastures for a number of years. So you might have a perennial ryegrass that you're wanting to keep for another 2 or 3 years. Well, oversowing with, say, a hybrid ryegrass can be an effective method, and you can generally knock back your sowing rate when oversowing back to around that kind of 60% or to 70% of your maximum, and that'll obviously reduce your cost per hectare, but still allow the effective plant numbers to carry you through. Next one. And with the phalaris pastures too, if you do have low numbers, trying to avoid, I guess, oversowing slow establishing species into pastures. So if you are looking to establish phalaris or cocksfoot or any of those species that do take a long time to establish, ensure that that you do have a complete knockdown. Don't oversow those slow establishing species into a background pasture, as you'll get an ineffective establishment. However, oversowing into perennial ryegrass with a ryegrass or another perennial ryegrass can be more effective, and that's because they've got such better seedling vigour. They'll jump out of the ground a lot quicker and establish. So avoid oversowing with slow establishing species, but things like ryegrass can be effectively used as an oversow option. Keep moving. And then on the lower plant densities, a Lucerne stand there with a lot of bare ground, not going to produce a lot of effective dry matter for you over the year. So in this situation, we can either do a complete renovation where you spray the pasture out, work it up, and then put an annual ryegrass in or a cereal. Or in that situation, there you might even just look at with a lot of bare ground, you might look at oversowing that pasture with an annual ryegrass for another year or so until you decide to do a full renovation next year. Okay, moving. Now, in terms of the fast feed options, annual ryegrass is generally your cheapest option and low cost. It's very fast establishing, great for silage and hay options. So sown in autumn, you can, and depending on the time of sowing, can have effective feed through that winter period, and you can continue to graze all the way through spring if you want to, or in other situations, if you're looking to bulk up the amount of feed for silage or hay that you've got in your shed, it does give you the versatility to be able to lock up, take a silage cut off, and then continue to graze late in the season if you get late rain. Now, there's a range of annual ryegrasses available, and the major difference between the varieties is their ability to produce feed from kind of spring onwards. So an earlier maturing variety like A. datilla will be quite effective up until about mid-spring, but once it runs ahead, we'll finish up, and that's probably suitable for a lower rainfall environment. However, if you've got rainfall over kind of 550 millimetres, then a late heading annual ryegrass option will provide you valuable feed later into the year, into that late spring period, and increase your silage and hay quality. Depending on I'll continue on that one, Will. So depending on your time of sowing with your annual ryegrasses too, say you're sowing in March, early April, your first grazing will be in that 6 to 7 week period. However, as the season progresses and we start to get later with our break and we start sowing in May, you might find that first grazing, or you will find that first grazing will push out to kind of 8 to 10 weeks. So not only are you sowing later, the time for first grazing is later. So if you can, I encourage you, if you're looking for quick feed, get your pasture in early if you can. And in some situations, dry sowing prior to rainfall event or a major rainfall event can be a very effective way to get quick feed in autumn. Move along to the next one. Likewise, Italian ryegrass gives really the benefit, and in some situations can go for 2 years. So as in environments like South Gippsland or Tasmania, you'll find that your Italian ryegrass will go into a second season. But in most situations in more northern areas or hotter summer environments, you'll find that the Italian ryegrasses are really a 1 year option. But what they do is they give you a lot of benefit in that late spring through to early summer period. and they can provide an additional hay or silage harvest or an additional grazing or two, which is more than outweighs or far outweighs the additional seed costs. So it's quite commonly used in more high rainfall zones where your rainfall is, or you're in irrigation or your rainfall is over 700 millimetres. I would encourage you, an Italian ryegrass could provide, really a lot of additional benefit later in the season, and it may allow you to do an early silage cut and a late hay cut, and then further boosting up your fodder reserves. Go to the next one. Hybrid ryegrasses are basically they're a cross between a perennial ryegrass and an Italian ryegrass, and they can vary in their perenniality. So you can have some species that will be 90% perennial and 10% Italian, and on the flip side of that, you might have some that are 25% perennial and 75% Italian. And as you increase the Italian parentage in the plant, it'll increase your winter production. And as you go at the other end in terms of the perenniality, you get more life out of it, so they can persist for 3 or 4 years. And they can be an effective method if you're not looking to do a renovation or you're wanting to bulk up your perennial stand for kind of another 2 or 3 years. Oversowing with a shogun, which can last for that long, can be a really effective method for bulking up for multiple years. Or likewise, if you're just looking to do a full renovation, but you're only looking for a 2 or 3 year option, the hybrid ryegrasses are a really good option because they're very quick to establish. They give really good winter feed, but they have the benefit of going multiple years. We'll just make mention with the hybrid ryegrasses, they will be slightly slower than an annual ryegrass to establish on that first grazing, but then from the first grazing onwards, they'll generally hold on with an annual ryegrass throughout the season and then kick on later in the year. Forage oats, I guess, have the real benefit of being able to be sown early into warm soil temperatures. So often long season forage oats are sown in March, can be sown at deeper than ryegrasses, so that allows you to avoid any false breaks and dry sow before the start of the season. And because of the seed size, they're very vigorous out of the ground. So what you'll find is, compared to a ryegrass, your oats at that first grazing will provide significantly more feed for the animals, so can fill that late autumn, early winter feed gap over ryegrass, and it's something that I guess it's critical at this time of year. Going through spring, they will produce, once they start to form their node in that early spring period, that's when the plant starts to go reproductive. If we continue to graze cereals through that period, what we do is we end up grazing them out and they won't recover. So once we get to early spring period, unless you're wanting to graze the oats out, we're generally locking them up either for a silage or hay harvest, or in some situations for grain recovery. Most of the forage types are not that great for grain recovery, so generally recommended for silage or hay. So to recap on oats, very good early establishment, fill late autumn, early winter feed gap, and then very good for bulking up your silage and hay, but it doesn't really give you the versatility of grazing through the spring period. Keep moving. On the forage barley, the barleys are probably the best option on a late sow. So if we get a late break and we're getting to May, the barley will be the quickest to establish and very similar to rye corn in this situation. Barley doesn't tend to be as longer seasoned as your forage oat varieties. So sown early in, say, a March or April period, you'll find that they'll run to head and be finished quite early in that early spring period. So recommendation is, if you're sowing early, use oats. If you're getting to May and you're looking for quick feed options, the barleys will produce more feed than oats on a late sow. And then the other thing to consider is the forage quality, and barley out of all the forage cereals will provide the best forage quality for silage or hay. And so that's something to consider if you are looking to feed it to stock that are going to be growing stock, whereas something like an oats is probably not as suited to that situation. And the other thing to consider is that barley is more sensitive to waterlogging and more sensitive to acid soil. So if you're in those environments, then try and steer clear of your barley. And if you are in acid soils and you do experience some periodic waterlogging, then maybe a rye corn is a better option on the late sow. So a lot of this information I spoke about today is contained in the Heritage Seeds Winter Feed and Forage Guide. So I encourage you, if you do want to read a little bit more, there's some situations there and some options. So it's quite a detailed book. So anyone listening today want a bit more information, then feel free to go on our website and read the guide. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's pretty important to understand, I suppose, where you want to go with what pasture species, and one of the drivers behind maximising production of whatever the choice is or the choices are across the farm and for individual paddocks is going to be nitrogen as a key driver for increasing that dry matter production. So I've just got a couple of slides just to quickly talk about the key rules and understandings around what we consider when we apply nitrogen in a pasture situation. So working from left to right on that diagram, our most common form of nitrogen that we use is urea. It's the cheapest form. However, when we do apply urea, there is a chance that it can volatilise. So if you don't get rainfall, effective rainfall, which is probably 10 mil in most situations, within 3 or 4 days of application, you can get losses in the subsequent week of application. So probably for the first 6 to 10 days after you apply urea, if you haven't had effective rainfall or you haven't incorporated the urea, then you can get those losses. So to minimise those losses, obviously timing, getting the nitrogen on before a rainfall event, or you can use a product called green urea, which actually protects 70% of the volatilisation losses of that urea. Once the urea is converted into ammonium, which is a form of nitrogen in DAP and MAP, the plants can access some of that. However, most of it has to be converted through to nitrate, which is a far right-hand yellow box there, and soil bacteria actually act on that. And so soil temperature and moisture are the major drivers of how quickly that conversion from ammonium to plant-available nitrate occurs. And in the middle of winter, obviously, that conversion is a lot slower than what it would be if we had significant rains at the moment or in late spring. And also tied into that is organic carbon. So typically pastures have higher organic carbon levels than cropping systems. So we will get mineralisation of nitrogen from that organic carbon when we've got warm, moist soils. However, if we do incorporate a lot of standing dry material, which may not be so much of an issue this year, we can get immobilisation, so nitrogen being tied up by those bacteria looking for a feed source, which they grab that nitrogen and tie it up. When those bacteria die, then they release the nitrogen back into the system for the plants to use. So just some key rules on the next slide about what we're really looking at with respect to the rules around nitrogen. The first thing is autumn responses can be poor. So I think some of the work that Richard Eckhart has done from Melbourne Uni has sort of shown that I think it was about 3 out of 20 years they've found responses to nitrogen in autumn applications. And the reason typically is because soils are drier. There hasn't been enough moisture to wet up enough of the profile to give a sustained response or dry matter response to the plant. And therefore, the application of nitrogen won't boost any additional dry matter above that. And the other thing is, particularly after a dry spring and a hot, dry summer, we haven't had any mineralisation of nitrogen from organic matter over that period of time. So when we do, hopefully it's sooner rather than later, get a good break, we wet up that soil, the soils are moist, then we're going to get a lot of nitrogen coming through the system through that mineralisation of that organic carbon. And as that comes in, that's enough to satisfy the plant in the majority of cases up until that first grazing. So like Rob said, it might be that 5 to 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how late the break is. So I think so you just got to be a bit careful about those early nitrogen applications. It may be that we're looking at those the second grazing or the start of the second grazing before we look at nitrogen. With nitrogen, it's not just thinking about I need feed now and I've got to get nitrogen out. You've got to be forward thinking. So think of when the feed gaps are and plan in advance of when you want to put that nitrogen on. So and that may be applying while you've got at the end of, in the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks at the end of that first grazing, soil temperatures are still warmish, you're still getting reasonable growth rates before winter hits, So therefore, putting the nitrogen on, you're getting good nitrogen supply, good responses, and therefore you're carrying a feed wedge into winter, where we all know that that feed is at a premium. We want to make sure that we're applying it, as I said, within a week of grazing on good soil moisture. That's the key thing. We need at least 8 to 10 mil of rain to take it in. Our rates of nitrogen, we don't want to apply any rate less than 25 kilograms of N to the hectare. So that's about 50 or 55 kilos of urea equivalent. Rates less than the 50, 55 of urea will see us get variable and probably unresponsive at those low rates. So we need to go at least 25 kilos of N, up to a maximum of 60. In some cases we can go higher, but 60 is probably where we need to be, so it's about 120, 130 of urea. We find that Phalaris, because it has a bit higher protein than what ryegrasses do, actually responds at the top end of the N rates more so than ryegrass. So if you have got Phalaris and you are looking at topping it up with nitrogen, probably push it towards the top end of the N rates as well. But the amount of nitrogen you put on will be dictated to by how much feed you get out the other end. So higher N rates will typically mean you'll get more dry matter above your normal growth rates. There's just a couple of issues there as well around animal health and nitrate poisoning, and I'll touch about that, and also grazing management on the next slide. So the next slide is really just around grazing management, and Tom spoke about that before, how important grazing management is. So this is a ryegrass situation, and we're talking about 3 leaves, 2.5, 3 leaves, or canopy cover before we go and graze. And for cocksfoot and Phalaris, we're looking at that 3 to 4 leaf range. So if we've just grazed our pasture, on the left-hand side, we've got the residual. We've got the residual leaf there. The first leaf is coming out, like Tom said. The plant is using its water-soluble carbohydrates to throw that first leaf and the second leaf out. When that first leaf and that second leaf come out, the plant is taking up most of the nitrogen as nitrate nitrogen. So those leaves are chock full of nitrate. Once the nitrate is within the plant will then convert that back to ammonium, or reduce it back to ammonium into amino acids, and then back to proteins. But in those initial stages of the plant's growth, on those early leaves, then you've got a chock full of nitrate, very high nitrate levels, which can cause issues for animals. Primarily because it's got very low NDF, very high digestibility, so therefore the intake of the animal can be quite large as well. So they're eating a lot of it, of a high nitrate feed, so you can run into animal health issues from that point of view. So as you move through from left to right, the first leaf will probably throw out about 20% of your total dry matter that particular grazing rotation will allow. When the second leaf comes out, you'll get another 30%. And then when that final leaf comes out, it'll produce 50% of your total dry matter. So again, if you're going in and grazing at first or 1 or 2 leaf, then you're foregoing a lot of your dry matter. You're eating high nitrate, low protein feed, and also from a plant health point of view, the water-soluble carbohydrates haven't replenished, and therefore you potentially get thinning of the pasture sward as well. So that's pretty important just to get it all right. And then when the 4th leaf comes out, or the 5th leaf with the cocksfoot and Phalaris, your pasture quality starts to drop off. Not that that'll happen probably when we're going into winter. In against all of this is the point around nitrogen. So we've got our dry matter response there, but on the trials that we've done, and Cameron Goulet at the Department of Ag and Ellen Bank has done, if you apply nitrogen up front of that grazing rotation and you go too early with your grazing, you will get no residual carryover for nitrogen in the subsequent grazings. So with nitrogen in a pasture system, you either use it or you lose it. You won't get any carry through. So if you've invested the money in getting a response to that nitrogen and you haven't allowed that pasture to express its full leaves, then you will get no residual carryover of that nitrogen in the subsequent grazing. So there's a heap of different reasons just in that slide on why we should make sure that we've got our grazing management right, and particularly around nitrogen as well.
Very good, very good. We'll just ask a question. Any further questions? Okay, well, we have recorded this session today, and both IPL and Heritage Seeds will be distributed via the website and other ways. So I know a number of you have either emailed me or contacted me to say that couldn't either couldn't get other staff members in front of it or would like to see it and have it on record. So that will come out in the next over the next sort of half a day or so, and we will look to do further webinars based on seasonal requirements as we go forward. So I'm not sure if Lee or Will or Tom had any further comments, but from my perspective, thanks for joining us, and thank you guys for delivering it.
Thank you.
No further comments. We'll call it to an end. Thank you all. Goodbye.